Across his career, he has operated at senior levels within national and international companies, navigating public, private, and private equity backed environments. His experience spans growth strategy, sales transformation, international expansion, and strategic partnerships, consistently delivering measurable results and forming high pressure driven settings. Known for his ability to focus to complexity and lead teams through critical inflection points, Joe's leadership centers on execution, accountability, and building organizations that perform over time. Joe, welcome to Still Evolving. Joe, welcome to Still Evolving. Grateful to have you on the show and really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Amy. Delighted to be here.
So, why don't we start off, Joe? So, you're over in Ireland, a leading executive over there. Could you share a little bit with our audience, on your background, your journey, maybe where you started up to where you're working on now, the highlights as you see them?
Yes, if I started back in my school days, we'd run out of time in terms of the podcast. That's me being ageist towards myself. A primary degree in marketing, did the various postgrads in the various colleges, and worked in a bank, which would have been seen at that time, job for life, and then decided to pivot and move into sales, where actually sales would have been seen as a bless. You failed at everything else. And I always remember telling my darling mother that I was actually going into sales and leaving the bank. And it was kind of like, what have you done wrong? Was the question, as opposed to. So that's been my journey of sorts. And I would categorically happily say now, where I am looking back, that I am a professional salesperson or commercial leader. And there's a lot associated with the profession that still gives me a buzz, if that's a correct term to use. It's not for everyone. It's tough. It forces introspection. It tests your resilience. It absolutely does. And there's circumstances that happen outside of your control, which can affect those various different traits. But yeah, it's like being on a roller coaster.
Absolutely. Joe, can you give some context to the sales team that you're leading now and kind of maybe what you're
Yeah.
focused on now?
So at the moment, I'm actually heading up the UK and Ireland on an interim basis in Capita Experience. I'm privileged to work with seasoned commercial, I would also say consultative salespeople, experts in their field who are selling managed services solutions. These are big ticket deals in the order of tens of millions, total contract value, long gestation period in terms of the actual coming to deal fruition, competitive marketplace, and the industry that we're in is actually been upended entirely. It will not be the same industry that we're in years to come. AI is having a massive influence on it. So really exciting in terms of actually challenging ourselves to learn and find our way in this new ecosystem, if you want to call it, a new landscape, but mixed bunch. Both sort of male and female. And then depending on the actual sales cycle we're in, we have got a raft of experts that work with us. Solution architects, finance specialists, pricing specialists, deal architects, bid writers. So all of those teams assemble around the respective bids, which is, again, really exciting because you've got to get the best out of those people. Whilst they're not directly accountable to the pursuit lead, it's about making sure that team comes together and works well.
Wow. So I hear the dynamic condition, right? And a good bit of uncertainty with this AI revolution in the marketplace and what it might mean for you and the team and what is being delivered. I'm curious to hear from you around, along your journey, there's been other very abrupt or challenging times of change and that transition. So how have you seen leaders, what you've learned in leadership in high times of change? What helps you continue to innovate and lead your team despite the disruption?
I've seen good and bad leaders. The bad ones mark your card, so to speak, for future personas. And at the stage you're at in your career, whilst you may want to sort of be amicable and get on with everyone, sometimes you spot them a mile away. And with the greatest of respect, I've seen some really good leaders, and they're probably it's a lesser number. Those that I would absolutely respect. If there's common traits there, it's that level of courage, authenticity, and I suppose a true interest in the people that they're working with. You can spot superficial a mile away at the end of the day. And look, I've worked in international organizations, local MNCs within Ireland, private equity, family run, seen all of that dynamic. At the end of the day, the interactions between the teams and individuals who work in the environment that we're in, it's quite similar. I guess, yeah, I've seen events seen significant black swan events, as you'd call them, such as COVID, which has turned industries on their heads. It's killed various different businesses, but it's also, I suppose, it's offered opportunities for other businesses to flourish.
Can we talk about courage for a minute? I appreciate you bringing that aspect up of leadership. Oftentimes when I'm working with high performers, talk about the value of courage, even more so than something very familiar for many is confidence.
Mm.
Confidence can be very fleeting. One moment you're like, I'm on this, and then you get zinged one new aspect in the situation, and all of a sudden it may feel a lack of confidence, rather than if we focus on courage and how we kind of can step into that uncomfortable and take that action. Perhaps it is with the interactions with our team, but how powerful that can be. Can you talk about where you've seen perhaps or observed leaders stepping into that courageous kind of space and being able to share that perhaps in motivating or inspiring others? And what do you see that helps them take acts of courage?
There's particular instances, which I don't necessarily want to bore your audience with, where me as a sales leader, we were involved in a deal which we didn't win. And straight away you start to think of the consequences of that. But the executive in charge at the time, I was in telecommunications, was extremely motivating and positive as to how that team dealt with loss, dealt with being rejected. We were down to the last two. It was a binary outcome. To your wider question, I guess, again, there's a very well-known entrepreneur in Ireland who I will not name check, but I get his logic, which is there are team members, there's expertise relevant to the stage that a business is at. And sometimes as that business, whether it's corporate or private, startup, as it goes on its journey, certain individuals cannot make the leap into the next stage of evolution. It's not in their DNA. So making those decisions to have conversations with people to say, look, we need to part ways. It's not nice. I think it definitely falls into the coaching side of things to recognize that. I've had to do it myself on numerous occasions. I can broadly say that I can still face those individuals and talk to them. So I've been true to that person, recognizing their circumstances, if you're privy to it, and dealing with them respectfully. But at the end of the day, sometimes it amounts to a very hard and stressful decision on the recipient, but also on the person that's delivering the message.
What comes to mind, I have a friend who's also a very accomplished executive leader. And one of the greatest compliments I've heard many in the community give of him is that, just as you were saying, those people who he made decisions in his role as an executive leader to make a change, as you said, part ways with another, those people in the community still have fantastic rapport, fantastic relationship with him. Whereby, if in a social gathering, certainly they're kicking up the conversation, but also I think it was a testimony to his leadership and character that even after the shift, even after the departure, that person would contact him. And he would also extend what he could to, however he could support that individual in continuing in their journey. But indeed, incredibly demanding and stressful on both parts, right? At the
Yeah.
juncture of that decision. Speaking of support, Joe, as an executive leader of the team, you've referenced perhaps leadership that you've served under, but where do you find your connective support? Has that been from coaches or mentors, other colleagues, personal? Where do you find the support to kind of weather these storms?
I probably am going back into the black and white reels now. I have a personal regard. It's not a discriminatory view, but individuals who invest themselves heavily in sport, they take a discipline out of that. I was thrown into, well, it's well known in the States, but it's lesser known in Ireland, a sport called water polo. And it involved training 7 days a week sometimes. But look, you end the sport, but I think individuals that commit themselves to that regime of discipline, it stands to them. Whatever it is, athletics, field sports, team sports, individual sports, it shows a level of focus and commitment and to work in that environment. I guess in terms of the wider supports, you don't necessarily get it from within your own direct field of influence or working. There are individuals which over time you'll develop relationships with that you'll trust them to become sounding boards. And I think if they're entrusted with that position, the least you can hope for and expect is that they will be honest with you. That's not telling you what you want to hear. but it's actually being true advisors, trusted advisors. I can think of a select few in my world where, not everything has been actually, oh yeah, you're a fantastic person, keep doing it. You'll get the negative feedback. Sometimes they're delivering at a point earlier than you need to, where you can act upon it. And look, it's not necessarily from your line manager or the people you work with. And sometimes it's outside of the organization. A lot of people invest in private coaches nowadays and pay for it. I'm a bit cynical towards that. I think uh, within the profession that I'm in, that we're in, I'll always try and find time just to help other individuals. And
Mhm.
I think if people in this profession could adopt that same mantra, I'm not trying to do coaches out of their actual making a living, but it's called giving back in my world. You're giving learnings and insights. What went wrong? What went well?
Certainly the power of that support, that challenge, the mentorship that can kind of come from leaders who do coach back, helping
Hmm.
lift those up. And I also hear you talking about the power that's come from the connections whereby there is that trust factor in the realness and the feedback, right? That we're not all always kind of just getting the rosy picture of,
Yes.
or censored, I guess I should say, but
Yeah.
just the authentic, the real, which can be intense at times to hear, but
Hard
often
to
so
hard to hear.
critical. Yeah.
Sometimes hard to
Yeah.
absorb. Yeah.
You mentioned your experience in sport and some of the takeaways in that journey of persistence or grit, the discipline that comes from, you mentioned like the 7-day training cycle in pursuit of that goal. Along with sport too, what we've come to value is just the role of recovery for performance, right? That
Hmm.
we've learned that more is not always better. Actually, there are diminishing returns on just cranking hours, right?
Hmm.
We've learned now that sleep is the number one performance enhancer versus it used to be we perceived that time as a cost. Now we see it as an investment in that performance. For you, what helps you refuel, recharge, and recover? What have you used along the way?
Very cliched term. I don't know. Hopefully it travels well, but there's a term: a change is as good as a rest. So y- a break. So people take annual leave or take sabbaticals or whatever. Sometimes they don't really switch off, but actually to truly take that time out, you're investing in yourself, number one, but also your colleagues or the person that's employing you or the business that is relying upon you. If you're an entrepreneur or self-employed, fundamentally they're going to benefit, because if you do actually come back recharged, re-energized, there's a better self there, but there's also a better contributor there, if that makes sense. And I agree, yeah, just continuously sort of throwing more mileage in hours, whatever you're doing, doesn't benefit anyone. Look, it's probably a macho position that people take. Oh, I don't get stressed, or I don't get fatigued. It happens, and I think it's good to recognize it, and not that you sort of point a finger at someone and say, "Hey, listen, I think you're stressed," but it's to recognize it and to help individuals that you're working with. And I guess like the commercial roles that I've been involved in and am involved in, they're stressful. There's expectations, there's targets, there's deadlines, there's consequences, and there's rewards.
Absolutely. Well, and I think what you're alluding to is just we all have our human system and the load that we carry that whether that's in our professional roles, what comes with that load, whether it's the physical load that perhaps we're running around caring for a toddler and you don't get to just sit and rest, or maybe the cognitive loads of continuing to learn in the pursuit of your craft, the relational, emotional, spiritual loads, right? So the human system, we're all being impacted by the demands or the load that we're carrying. And while stress can help us perform, and we can rise to the occasion when the demand, like when it's on, it's on.
Yeah.
The chronic load, the toll that it takes on our systems without that recovery, no one's superhuman, right? Like
Hmm.
it will happen. And so I appreciate your perspective and of acknowledging fatigue not as a character flaw or critical judgment, just data that's saying that, hey, your system is taxed and you are unable to optimize that performance. So, how we can take care of ourselves, recover to be able to come back recharged. Certainly, you talk about the the value that brings to the organization, to the team, and the solution. So, absolutely. I like to wrap up just with something actionable. I can kick around these ideas of mindset, connection, recovery all day, and I like to nerd out with a bit of the science. But some people really want to know, what can I do? What's something that perhaps that you've used over the course of your journey? Could be a newfound tool or a routine, something consistently you're able to employ in your life that helps you to continue to evolve, to show up in your moments that matter.
It's an interesting question, probably a tough question. I guess if I answer it in the generic form in terms of the commercial professionals that I've worked with and industries I've worked in, that structure and that rigor, use that horrible term, following the process, is very valuable because just like a game plan in sports, it keeps you on track during negative and positive periods. And then fundamentally, once you're doing the right thing, results will come. The resilience piece at a personal level is really important because let's face it, you asked me a question about leadership. There's a lot of politics goes on in the working life that we're in, and there's negative actors and there's positive actors. So having that level of resilience and belief in yourself and having that support network where you sometimes need to get affirmation to say, look, you are a good person. You're really good at what you do. Stick at it. Those types of messages are equally important. So the last thing I would say, learning is, it's a gift. It's not an absolute given right. So people can say, oh, I'm beyond learning, I'm beyond teaching. I don't believe that. It's possible to learn something new every day and on a consistent cycle, be it formally or informally. And if you're open to it and in receive mode, that actually enriches you as an individual and a professional.
That the two things that really resonate, just hearing about the openness to learning, like it is a gift. Every day we have the opportunity to kind of take in information to help us show up, perhaps more aligned with our desired state, perhaps in a more optimized performance role. But also I hear you talking about the process. And it's oftentimes funny when I worked with younger athletes, they would all be in a room and I would say, we have to work the process, right? And everybody's, yeah, we're going to work the process. And then I'll say, well, what's the process? And so I really challenge all of our viewers. For you, that holds meaning. I would imagine the systems, the workflow, and how you guys are working to build relationships, to gather data, to put the team together that you described earlier, to be able to execute in a very compelling offer and win that deal, if you will. But overly focused on the results really detracts from that. So I appreciate you highlighting how day in and day out in the middle of the storm, it's easy to get caught up with the deal that wasn't won or perhaps what a competitor is doing. But if you can kind of come back and recenter on what do we do now? What's a focus right now? And so I really encourage people to define what that process is for them. What are the steps 100% in your control that if you execute them, increase the odds of the desired outcome occurring?
Yes.
And that's where the focus can lie and be very powerful is in that moment. What is the thing that I need to do today to increase the odds that by the end of this month, I will have reached whatever goal target that I've set out. So thank you for that reminder. Absolutely. Joe, thank you today also for this conversation. I'm very grateful to have you on. So thank you.
Enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Amy.